Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chaffee, Target Market Specialist with TVA, and I had the honor of introducing our next speaker, who many of you probably know, Didi Caldwell. Didi is one of the world's most authoritative site selection and incentives negotiations experts, specializing in capital, labor, and resource-intensive manufacturing projects. In her 21 years of consulting experience, she's conducted location advisory services in over 30 countries for both domestic and FDI-related projects totaling nearly $50 billion in capital investment. After beginning her career with Fluor Corporation, she opened her own consultancy, Global Location Strategies, in 2008. Since then, GLS has supported projects representing over $7.6 billion in capital investment and 7,200 jobs. Some of her past clients include Van Hool, Georgia Pacific, Duke Energy, and Procter & Gamble. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Didi for her presentation on embracing the chaos and thriving post-COVID. Didi, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Tyler. It's great to be with everyone. I'm sorry that we can't be face-to-face. This was originally planned, but as with most things this year, we're just going to make it work. So let's start out by talking about, I thought it was very clever that somebody had the foresight to call this conference disruption, because for certain we have seen plenty of disruption this year. I think way more than we possibly imagined. And I was just looking up the definition yesterday, and it says a break or interruption in the normal course or continuation of some activity or process. And I thought it was interesting that the example that they used here is that illness is a disruption of a balanced state. So we're all feeling a bit disrupted right now, and that's to be expected. This is not our normal state, and hopefully it will not continue to be our normal state. So I kind of like to take today and look at, where we have come from, what's the state that we're in right now, and what can we expect moving forward, and what can you as economic developers do in order to come out of this stronger than you began. So just quickly, what were we looking at the world at the end of 2019? It was already a state of disruption. I mean, there were many things that we were seeing going on. I put just a few of them here on the screen. Shifting energy landscape. I mean, certainly the shale revolution had completely changed the dynamics of global energy supplies and had put the United States into a position of dominance and power in that particular area. And that was changing the face of site selection, particularly on energy intensive projects or projects that were using natural gas as a feedstock. We certainly had rising nationalism. I mean, I think we see that some here at home, but it's really the dynamics that have been taking place in places like Eastern Europe, Russia, to a certain extent in Asia as well. We had trade and tariff uncertainty, so this was causing all kinds of issues associated with the global supply chains. When you have large, complex, multi-layered supply chains that extend globally, the impacts of trade and tariffs can be significant. Demographic pressures, so much of the developed world, including China and Europe and Russia, is aging very, very quickly. Japan is actually already aged into mass retirement, whereas there are certain places in the world, notably the US and Mexico, as well as India, that still have a very young demographic. So there were a lot of implications of that globally. And then the threat of conflict. I mean, it's really hard to believe that just back in January, there was a lot of talk about the tensions and the skirmishes that had happened between the United States and Iran. And that all seems like a very, very distant memory right now, but this was the world that we were dealing with at the end of 2019. We didn't really have any way of knowing what was going to come next, but it certainly had a huge impact on our lives. And I feel like I'm living in one of those movies with Dustin Hoffman, or the other one was called Pandemic, I think, or Contagion, I think. It just all seems very Hollywood and very, if it weren't so devastating and impactful to everyone's life, it really would seem like a larger than life movie. So now that we have adjusted to the fact that this is our reality, at least for the foreseeable future, where do we go from there? What comes next? And are you ready? Is your community ready? So my advice here is keep calm and embrace the chaos. I think there are plenty of stories of communities or individuals or businesses who have taken the opportunity when there is a crisis, that instead of retrenching and focusing on the things that trying to cut corners and seeing how they can protect, that they are actually the ones that are not going to benefit from the disorder that happens. It's the ones that take risks and actually focus on the fundamentals and keep pushing forward that are going to come out stronger than they entered the crisis. So I want to talk to you a few minutes about what that looks like for you. In the meantime, we're trying something new. Maybe you all have tried it already, but I'm going to pose a question. Hopefully you can see this question, and we'll look at the results later. And what I'd like to know from you is, what level of project activity have you seen since the pandemic reached the U.S.? Hopefully you can see your possible answers there. So it goes all the way from gangbusters, we're even better than before, about the same, plenty of interest, but mainly tire kicking, less activity than before, and we are dead. So those are your options, and we'll come back and look at those responses in just a little bit. So one of the things that I have been following is Thomas for Industry. They have been doing a survey since February about the impacts of COVID-19 on manufacturing in North America. And the most recent one that they've released was a survey that they did in the May-June timeframe. And I think it's really interesting here to see how the changes have happened over the months, starting in February and going through June. So this first question is, how likely are you to bring more production sourcing back to more North America after this outbreak? And it started out that there seemed to be much less interest in reshoring, but as you can see now, 2 in 3 manufacturers, or about 69%, indicate that they are either likely or very likely or extremely likely to reshore, and that's up from about 54% in February. Agricultural, energy and utilities, and food and beverage are leading the charge in terms of the industry sectors. But as you see, we see that more and more manufacturers that are located in North America are looking at bringing back production here or sourcing their raw materials from North America. I thought this was this quote was particularly relevant. It says, "I think this pandemic has caused a refocus of where we get raw materials, products, and services. In a twinkling of an eye, we can lose our connection with companies abroad. Doing more business domestically will force our nation to revisit labor rates, which is a big driver at companies looking abroad." And we've seen this with our clients as well, that companies are really talking about the cost associated with the risk of these multi-layered, complex global supply chains. And it's our belief that this risk has been insufficiently priced previously, and now that companies are relooking at that, and the dynamics of where you get the biggest return on investment have changed. This concept that companies are going to continue to pursue the lowest cost of production, no matter where it is and no matter what risks there are associated with that, is really kind of an old paradigm that we've seen shifting very, very quickly. Here's another one. I think this is relevant because it tells us where companies are going to need more support. So what type of products or services are they going to be looking for? And metals, fabricated products, and machining tools and parts are the ones that are most likely to be sourced domestically. And these are areas where these have frequently been outsourced and to other nations. And as we start to pull some of this production back to North America, more specifically to the US, I think that building this capability either in your region or in an area where they can get access to this is going to become more and more important. I do think that some of that highly labor-intensive work will go to Mexico. So really understanding how your community relates to imports from Mexico, what kind of supply chains, freight lanes, that sort of thing exists is going to be very important. And then also what type of workforce development efforts you're taking on can be informed by this. So this is a survey from the Site Selectors Guild. This was from June 2020, and we're about to do another one. And it just shows you that the industries with the most project activity of what guild members are seeing is 67% in biotech and life sciences, 51% in I said the advanced manufacturing were industries that were going to see the most product activity. Food and beverage, transportation and logistics, and software and IT. I can say that from our perspective at GLS, this aligns very, very well. We're also seeing some strength in some building materials and composites associated with the building industry. Food and beverage has been very strong. We've also seen some movement in the supply chains associated with semiconductors, integrated circuit boards, and microelectronics. The dynamics that are happening now between Taiwan and China. Taiwan is where a lot of the semiconductors are made, and China is obviously where a lot of the assembly of microelectronics happens. And if you haven't noticed in the news, there's a lot of friction there, and a diplomatic breakdown between those two countries could have a huge impact on that supply chain. And so we're seeing more and more companies interested in relocating that supply chain to a more a safer environment that's also closer to their customers. So I want to get back to the question that we posed previously, which is what level of project activity have you seen since the pandemic reached the U.S.? It seems like the highest response is 30%, which is less activity than before. And I'm having trouble seeing what it says for we are dead, but it seems like a pretty small percentage. And then there's still a few that are about the same, 20% and 17%. So about 37% collectively have either not seen an impact or you're actually stronger than before. I can say from GLS that our activity level has been very high, but I do think that there are a lot of companies right now that are doing kicking the tires. So we have seen a lot of companies want to do location benchmarking studies that say, if I were to move forward with this investment, where would it be most advantageous for me to do that? And then they're also using that location benchmarking to give them some real world data on the types of, on what's in their business case. So instead of saying, we think that electricity is going to cost us this and labor is going to cost us that, we can give them real world data that is location specific. I think that this is sort of a triple whammy. You know, we've got summer holidays, which always impacts activity somewhat. We have an election year, which usually impacts activity at least until about the September timeframe. And then we have COVID-19, which obviously has an outsized effect. So between those three things, I would say within the last month or so, we've seen a little softening of interest, but nothing that we would consider to be out of the ordinary considering everything else that is going on. So I'm still pretty optimistic that as soon as we start to get a little bit further into the year, we have a little bit more clarity on the election, people come back from whatever was their holiday this year, that we will continue to see some growth. I'm not sure how to advance to the next poll. So if somebody can bring that up, that would be great. This is also from the Site Selectors Guild survey that we did, and it looks at what are the percentage of consultants that think that these areas are likely or highly likely for an expansion or location project in the next 12 months. So as you can see, suburban and mid-sized urban areas did very, very well. I don't think that that is much different than what we would normally expect. Typically, a lot of, particularly manufacturing and industrial projects, are either looking in smaller urban areas or suburban areas, or a lot of the projects that we do look even in rural areas, as long as they have very strong industrial connections. But I do think that there is an impact on these large urban areas. We're starting to see many companies that are saying that we are no longer going to have huge offices located in the metro areas, that we might move to more smaller offices in multiple locations, which allow people to commute shorter distances to work, and also have less risk of an exposure from something like COVID-19. If we have 200 people in an office versus 2,000, then if we have an outbreak, it's likely to have less impact on our operations. So I think you can see there, how concerned are you about the economic prospects for your community? The overwhelming majority say somewhat concerned. This will hurt, but hopefully we will do okay once it is all over. I think I was doing some research yesterday, and it's like the alphabet of recovery forecast. So, you've got the V recovery, the U-shaped recovery, a W, thinking that we might get a second wave, which might lead to a new round of shutdowns, which will depress the economy again. And then you've got the pessimistic view of the Z-shaped recovery, which means that we basically won't get back to pre-COVID levels anytime in the foreseeable future. At least not at the same growth trajectory than we had. And I'm really wondering who is not concerned at all. I pride myself on being optimistically delusional. I really, really hope that that you're right. I do have a lot of confidence. I think that there are probably going to be some generational impacts that we're not going to know what they're going to be until we get there. And some of them we may never know, because it may be really hard to trace specifically what was related to COVID-19 and what might have something to do with another macroeconomic event that is impacting future growth prospects. But I think that it looks pretty encouraging there that about 70% of you are just somewhat concerned. Okay, let me get back to my advancing thing here. So what are we watching now? So we talked about when we started out that there was an instability in the energy markets, or that the U.S. had done so well in energy because of the shale revolution. But one of the things that COVID-19 has really created is this instability in the energy market. So demand dropped precipitously, and we actually saw West Texas crude go negative for a very short period, which you can see that has never had, that's never happened before, not since oil has been traded. It's since recovered somewhat, but we are starting to see some of the major effects. And you may have been following that there have been a couple of refineries in California that have recently announced that they're going to close down. California refineries are unique in the U.S. in that they generally do not process U.S. crude. They are importing almost everything that they bring in, which tends to be more expensive and is certainly more susceptible to interruptions in the supply chain due to shipping. There's also been some refineries that have closed globally, and there are oil fields that are being shut down, and they will probably never recover. When you shut down certain oil fields, it takes a really long time for them to start back up, whereas the shale oil fields in the U.S., certain wells may be negatively impacted or may be permanently closed, but they're so spread out, and there's so many of them, that the shale oil exploration and the natural gas that goes along with that will be able to recover much more quickly. That leads me to believe that the U.S. is going to be in a strong position moving forward. The other thing that we are watching is confidence in the US dollar. So I don't know if any of you are refinancing your house right now, but you can see that interest rates are at historically low rates. And this is basically due to the fact that the US dollar, despite the fact that we've done stimulus funding in the trillions of dollars, I think we're approaching about $4 trillion now. The US dollar is still regarded as one of the last havens of value. And so it's almost like free money. So even though the US government is issuing a lot of debt right now, and we will have to pay that back, the interest rates with which we are going to have to pay it back are extremely low. So that also bodes well for the US economy. Impact on real estate. I think that for you as economic developers, this is definitely something to think about. That, you know, your retail spaces, which have been impacted by this, could become future fulfillment centers. And there's just a couple of examples here from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal of Amazon and others moving into these dark stores to use them as fulfillment centers for that last mile e-commerce. And then this is one of the things that troubles me is the impact of COVID-19 on budget shortfalls. As you can see that in 2021, the budget shortfall from COVID-19 is anticipated to be the largest on record. And I am concerned about what's going to happen with economic development organizations and how will they continue to be funded at the same level, and will that impact their ability to keep their community investment ready. So the next question here is, what impact do you think COVID-19 and the resulting economic impact will have on your organization's budget for next year? And that's anywhere from no impact to severe impact to I don't know. Okay, trying to advance to the next slide here. Okay, so to close, I want to go through 4 ways that you can thrive in this new reality. And this is just focusing on the fundamentals of being investment ready. So the first thing is developing your product, develop your workforce, refine your business case, and then develop some new marketing tools that take into account the reality of the post-COVID world. So the first one, developing your product. You've probably heard this from me. If you've heard me speak, I preach about this all the time. This is the life cycle of product development, starting all the way with identification, evaluation, due diligence and acquisition, marketing, and then ultimately you want to get to the goal of announced project. Companies are going to be looking to make decisions quickly. Once they decide they want to move, they're going to want to go to the place that can offer them the best business conditions with the lowest risk in the quickest time frame possible. So time is money here. So I just want to encourage you to focus on product development. Developing your workforce. One of the things that came out of the Thomas for Industry survey is that there's going to be a continued need for skilled labor and apprenticeships. So you can see that general factory labor and machinists or machine operators are 2 of the highest types of fields that they are hiring for. And 1 in 3 companies said that they are actively hiring. And industries engaged in apprenticeship programs were less impacted by the lack of skilled labor. So GLS has just spent some time working with a metals company in Kentucky to develop an apprenticeship program to help them fill their needs. And so I would ask you, what are you doing to help move forward those apprenticeship programs in your community? Refining your business case. So knowing where you compete and then making sure that you are as competitive as possible on the factors of cost, quality, and risk. So you want to be right in the middle where all of those 3 come together, where you're the lowest cost, the highest quality, and the least risk. One of the things that you can do is you can look at, this kind of relates to being the highest quality and the least risk, but also is focusing on product development, is if you look at your site and what are the site improvements that you could make, and in what types of project profiles would they advance your site. And so you can see here, you can look that at this particular, doing an upgrade of the natural gas infrastructure was going to benefit them the most across a broad spectrum of types of projects. So that would be something that you would definitely want to pursue. Whereas an endangered species report impacted almost all projects, and it's a fairly low cost item. So that would be something that you would want to move forward with. Developing new marketing tools. Now, this is from a business perspective. So this was Thomas for Industry, and this was one of their questions that they ask is how important the avenues to reach new customers before and after the market. So you can see that trade shows and face-to-face visits have gone down in importance tremendously, and things like webinars and websites and emails and things like that are becoming more and more important. And I think that definitely applies to the economic development world as well. So think about how can you use your this time that you have, where you're probably going out to visit less prospects, you're going to less trade shows. How can you use those resources of both time and budget to really hone your digital marketing? I want to brag a little bit on the Savannah Joint Development Authority. We had a call with them last week, and they showed us this story map that they created with GIS. And it was a really nice way to look at their product portfolio. And I'm not saying that you need to do this, but making sure that you have websites and site databases and story maps are something that really can communicate the value proposition that your community and that your sites and buildings have. Drone videos are very, very useful. Also videos that really capture the spirit of whatever your community is about. I think that even though they can be considered marketing fluff, I think it really does help bring a prospect in and help understand what your community is really about. So it looks like that most of you said that it was going to have a moderate impact. Well, not most, it was 45% said that it was going to have a moderate impact, and about 14% said that it was going to be a severe impact. So we do expect that there will be some cuts here. I would encourage you to start looking now at how you can creatively plug those budget gaps, or what things you can cut that will not impact your ability to continue to go after business. Certainly, I think that cutting back on product development or cutting back on marketing is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, I think it's just going to hurt you in the long run. So if those are things that you are on the table, I'd like to propose that you think about ways that you can cover those budgets in a creative way. And then the other thing is making sure that you have the resources there to respond to site selection consultants and companies when they have questions. So this is encouraging. This also came out for Thomas for Industry, and it asked manufacturing companies in North America if they thought the manufacturing sector could recover from the effects of COVID-19. So an encouraging 91% said that they did believe that it could recover, and I'm hopeful that those that are in the trenches have knowledge of that, and that they are in fact correct. And I just, in closing, I think, you've probably seen that sometimes I talk about build it and they will come. And I think that absolutely applies here. And that without risk, there is no reward. And when you're talking to your communities and your stakeholders, continue to push them on taking the types of risks that are going to bring jobs and investment to your community. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Thanks, Didi. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the app under Ask a Question there, and we will receive it on our end and ask it. Had a couple of them come in already. So let's see. Do you expect the outcome of the presidential or congressional elections to have a major effect on the trends you are discussing, particularly reshoring and supply chain changes?
I mean, I think there are some policy changes that could happen that will impact the speed with which things happen. And certainly if you take an extreme view, they could actually accelerate or negatively impact those impacts. Generally, what we see in a presidential election is it doesn't really matter who gets elected. It's just that people have some uncertainty moving into the election. And then once it seems like they know who's going to be elected or the election is over, that activity picks up again. I do think that some of the policies of this current administration have encouraged investment into the United States. Or at least accelerated that investment. But I think that there are larger geopolitical and energy dynamics, demographic dynamics that are happening globally that regardless of who's elected, we're going to see really strong interest in North America moving forward.
Got it. All right. Another question on, you touched on things to do to improve sites. I think that chart was extremely useful on what you can do to improve your product based on the industry sector you're looking at recruiting there. This one's kind of geared more towards existing building space, and a lot of communities have vacant space that's in need of upfit, right? So what should they do on the local side to improve these buildings, if anything? I know a lot of locals kind of are hesitant to do any upkeep or upfits to existing buildings at this point.
Well, I think one of the challenges is probably ownership. So it depends on who owns the building. In some cases, you can get a private developer to come in and do those improvements. But I'm assuming that these are communities that don't have that luxury. Before I made any investments, I would definitely, do an analysis of what they thought the possible return on investment is going to be. So what type of projects are you trying to attract, and how successful do you think you're going to be when you benchmark yourself against other communities? Do you have a competitive position when it comes to cost or quality or risk? And if you do, then those are probably pretty safe bets to take. But you need to understand that first. I mean, you can always wait until a prospect comes along, but chances are their timeline is not, or their appetite to just take on that extra effort is not going to meet with their own objectives. So you do run a risk of doing that. Now, you might be able to do some things proactively that stop short of actually making those improvements, but contemplate the improvements like engineering studies, construction estimates, permitting, pre-permitting, just to speed that timeline up and to reduce the risk associated with making those changes.
Got it. All right. Next question. Are there any apps or technologies that GLS has relied heavily on during COVID? Every single virtual meeting platform, I think we've taken advantage of, Zoom and Google Hangout. We use Teams internally because we use SharePoint. We use all the Microsoft suite of products, which we love. One of the things that is very beneficial for us is that we have a GIS platform called GeoThink that we use, and it gives us an incredibly rich diversity of data that we can look at geospatially. So we can do site identification, we can do site evaluation, we can do demographic analysis, traffic counts, comparing parcel values and cost per acre and that sort of thing, all from a desktop level. So that has really improved our ability to persevere through this. I can't even imagine what would have happened or what it would have been like if COVID had hit just even 10 years ago. We would have been much less able to continue to conduct business. And we do a lot of virtual site visits. So we've been doing virtual site visits since 2012, 2013, when the technology was really brand new.
So we feel like we're pretty much pros at this, but obviously it has gotten much better. And that gives us the ability to do about 80% of everything that we would do on the ground virtually. And it has the added benefits, which I have to say were pretty much unintentional, that we can typically include more sites earlier in the process than we would have previously if we had had to physically go visit them, particularly because our projects tend to be very heavy industrial, so sites could be located hundreds of miles apart. And the other added benefit that was unintentional as well is it has allowed our clients to be involved much earlier in the site selection process. So whereas they would have never considered coming with us on that first round of consultant site visits, they oftentimes join the virtual site visit. And they can be a passive participant, they can actively participate, or in some cases we've had clients that want to lead the virtual site visit. So that has been an indispensable tool for us.
Good. All right. Next one. Everyone kind of always brings this one up, but how do you prefer to get to stay in contact with local communities, especially now during COVID times?
Well, normally what I would say is come see me in Greenville, but don't do that now. I do not want to see you. No offense. Well, I mean, I think there's been some creative things that people have done. I mentioned the Savannah Joint Development Authority, but we had a little trivia game last week where, it was a lot more casual, and it wasn't just about, let me show you our community. We had a little bit of that, but sometimes just checking in and seeing how things are going. I mean, certainly we appreciate it when communities do that from a regional level, because it would be really difficult for us to have individual conversations with every community that's out there, but we still want to hear from you. And I definitely still appreciate receiving personalized emails that let me know what's going on with the community. Hey, we had this closure. We've started this we've got this new spec building, or we've just certified this site. Really monumental information like that has an impact on where I might put my client. One of the other things I would suggest is that on our website, if you go to the Economic Development Services, there is a link there that you can submit your site to our internal site database. And we're really looking for sites that are 50 acres and above, 50 acres with rail and above, or 75 acres without rail and above. And that way it's just an internal database that we use to help identify sites very early on in the process. And so that's another way just to keep your community and your site in consideration when we're doing projects.
Got it. All right. How should communities change their messaging to prospective companies and site location consultants as a result of COVID? Or do you think it should be pretty similar as to what it was before?
I think the message, and I've seen a lot of economic developers make this pivot, which I think has been very positive, particularly at the beginning, where they're not just, economic development agencies are not just there to recruit the company to their location. They're also there as a partner moving forward, so that when a crisis hits, you're not just going to be left to your own devices, that organization is going to continue to support you and help you move through the crisis. I think that's going to become more and more important, particularly given everything that we've been through. So I would incorporate that message. And if you have testimonials or case studies that you can demonstrate that, I think that would be even more powerful.
Great. All right. It looks like we've got about 5 minutes left. We've got a couple more questions, but if anybody has any additional ones, feel free to submit them. What do you consider to be the greatest silver lining of COVID?
Well, for me personally, it's the fact that I have been able to be at home with my family and spend some real quality time. I mean, I'm usually traveling 3 or 4 weeks a month. So this has been a huge change for me. And I must say I'm going a little bit stir crazy. But being able to spend time with my kids and my husband, that's been fantastic. And I do think that, it's caused us to sort of as a society and as businesses and as communities to really focus in on what's important. There are going to be a lot of businesses that fail, and that is going to be a tremendous loss. But you do find, we found this in the Great Recession, that those businesses that do survive come out stronger and leaner than they were and ever would have been before the recession, because they really have to focus on what is their key value proposition and how they're going to deliver that. So even though it's a painful cloud, there is a silver lining.
Right. To what extent are you coordinating your analysis and data with local public officials? I would assume that's now in coronavirus times a bit more important.
Well, I would say that the labor data is a bit all over the place, because either the data is not current enough, and so it doesn't affect what the current reality is, or it's current, but nobody expects that the current reality is going to be the reality of a year or 2 years from now. So I would say that, I don't know if this really answers the question, but I would say that we're looking at long-term trends and making sure that, we're making decisions, or we're advising companies on decisions that are based on, sort of more of a long-term trend of data, and then doing analysis, simulations of, if this happens to not work out, if things don't continue along this trend, what would be the impact to you? So that sensitivity analysis and scenario planning is something that's become much, much more important in the minds of our clients.
Next question is, are you currently aware of any large employment-based projects that were slated for large urban areas that are being shelved or reconsidered for a suburban or smaller urban area?
I am not, and I would say that, our projects tend to be more heavy industrial, so we're generally not looking at large urban areas anyway. But some of the site selectors in the Site Selectors Guild and others that deal in more office projects, I think would probably be better equipped to answer that kind of question. I have heard it anecdotally, but I don't know specifically of any projects.
Right. Okay. In light of COVID, are there any communities or states that have developed unique incentives or programs to recruit or retain businesses that you've come across?
I think the thing that I have seen most often is that on the compliance. So if companies are not meeting their employment goals this year that they had in their previous agreements, their development agreements, that states and communities are being much more flexible on enforcing those agreements and giving them extra time in order to be able to meet those. I'm trying to think if I've seen anything that's specifically around COVID. I think that there are, I don't know if it's necessarily an incentive, but there have been some, marketing efforts which are going after kind of the PPE supply chain. I do think that the biotech and pharma, the reagents that are used in the pharmaceuticals that we have to make, vaccines, PPE, medical device, that there's going to be a really strong push to bring those back to the United States, or at least to North America, and that there is talk of even, federal incentives to do that. I don't think there's nothing that's been approved yet, but there's definitely conversations that are happening about that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay. We've got 1 minute left, but this is just a kind of a personal question from me. With no more handshakes being acceptable, what's the proper etiquette on a personal site visit during these times? It always feels kind of goofy to do a fist bump or an elbow. I know there's always that awkward couple of seconds when you first meet them.
Well, I mean, I think the safest thing was we could just learn from the Japanese and just, take a bow, because that doesn't involve any physical contact. And I do like it's a nice gesture to show, respect. And so I think it's a good one. I'm fine with the elbow bump as well.
Got it. All right. Well, I think we are out of time, but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today virtually. We appreciate the presentation, fantastic insight, and I believe it will be available to everybody after this. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to be here.